Alrighty. Hello, everybody. Welcome back in. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to go over some of the basics of the NHL. The game of hockey has shown growth over the last little while, but not really what you would hope. One thing that's widely noted from a lot of fans is sometimes it can be really complicated to follow. So, what we're going to do today is go over a few of the basics, some of the on ice stuff, some of the off ice stuff, and salary cap. The reason that we want to go over these three things is because as a new fan, these are the things you're going to want to understand to help kind of catch the grasp of it and catch up to other hockey fans. When we look at the rules overall, we're looking at an overview of the basics. For the record, there's a lot of them, and we know that. I'll try to keep it as concise as I can so we don't over convolute it. You've just got a basic idea. As I go through, then I'll create new videos that go a little bit more in depth with these kinds of things. The whole idea for this video is just to get new people to kind of understand what's going on. It's widely noted that a lot of times things can happen during an NHL game, and the question gets asked, how do you explain that to a new fan? How do you make that make sense? A lot of times it just won't. So we'll try to clear some of the air on that. As it shows, apologies. We're going to start with the rink itself. So every NHL game is played on the same surface. It is a 200 by 85 foot ice surface. These are some of the dimensions it shows up that kind of how everything's positioned. You'll notice that there are a total of 9 dots where you can have a face-off. 2 in the zone, 2 in the neutral, or sorry, 4 in the zone, 4 in the neutral zone, and then center ice. The only time the center ice spot is used is at the beginning of a period or the game, and anytime a goal is scored. Otherwise, it's very rare that you'll go back to center ice for any reason. They'll go to one of the remaining 8, depending on what's happened during the play. Now, these zones are important. There's a few shapes in there that we have to make a note of. So the circles generally is your rule of thumb on the face-off. There's the 2 guys in the middle taking the face-off, and then everybody else is along the outsides of these circles. Some guys will cheat, get the hop an extra step by stepping into the circle as the puck is being dropped. You have the trapezoids at each end behind the goaltender. Those are there to prevent the goalies basically from going to the corners and dumping the puck. We'll kind of go over that and as to how that applies to the rules. Then you have the 2 blue lines. Those indicate the offensive and defensive zones. And really, it's just the person with the puck is the first person that needs to cross that line from the offensive team. It's to prevent things like cherry picking. You can thank the New York, I believe it was the New York Rangers or the New York Americans and the Boston Bruins. They had a game where things got out of hand and the NHL went, enough's enough. So they put those blue lines in and said the person carrying the puck has to go first. But other than that, yeah, if you want to take a quick pause on the video if you'd like to kind of see how these line up and everything. We'll move onwards though to the on-ice rules. So these are the rules that you're going to most commonly run into. There are a lot of them that don't appear here. Again, these are just basic gameplay stuff that you're going to run into almost every game for most of them. So the first thing that you need to know about on-ice rules is they have an intended purpose to either prevent or preserve something. And that's the whole point of them being in place. When you're either preventing a player from getting hurt or you're preserving the spirit of the game. Some of these rules get out of hand and that can make it a little bit complicated, especially when the refs are having a bit of an off game, which is not uncommon. So we'll basically go down. I will denote which of these are penalties and how long of a penalty they generally are. Bearing in mind that if any one of these penalties is considered egregious enough, they'll count for 2, not 1. It's called a double minor. So we'll go down the list and we'll just kind of continue that on. So you've got tripping. That's a basic one. If any part of your body comes in and kicks out this player's skates or legs, that's considered tripping. That's not an appropriate way to prevent a player from continuing on. Generally, it's the puck carrier. That's 2 minutes. Hooking. So same idea. You take your stick, you hook it in, and you give a pull, and you've either pulled the player's stick or their body, which has unfairly allowed you to slow them down. Again, that's another 2 minute. Spearing, pretty straightforward. You take your stick and you jab it into the person in a spearing-like fashion. This is one of the ones where, if depending on how bad it is, it can be a 2 minute minor where it's just don't do that. Or if it's egregious enough and the player is actually hurt, it'll be a double minor, which is two straight 2 minute penalties. Boarding, boarding and charging, they kind of get they're kind of the same thing, but not really. This is when you are physically going to check somebody. I also realized I didn't throw in cross-checking. So this is when you're physically using your body or your stick to push or hit somebody. Spearing, boarding, and charging very commonly, if they are egregious, they will be double minors as well, but normally they're 2 minutes per. Boarding is when someone takes an unnecessarily aggressive hit, generally from behind, with a player that is up against the boards. That is an incredibly dangerous play. That is how guys get hurt badly. Neck injuries, back injuries, head injuries. So they obviously don't want you doing that. Charging is a body check where the player has taken, I believe it's 5 or more strides without stopping their feet before a check. So you can skate and skate and skate, but you have to stop skating before you make contact. Otherwise, that's considered egregious, and you'll get either 2 minutes or 4 minutes, depending on how bad it is. Unsportsmanlike conduct. That's kind of the general you can't do that rule. So what that is that can be anything from tampering with another player. In the early 2010s, it kind of encompassed Sean Avery, who was waving his stick in front of a goaltender in the playoffs, and they went, "That's not okay." Unsportsmanlike conduct are basically, plays where somebody has done something that doesn't directly line up to a rule, but in the spirit of the game, you should not be doing that. You find those more in chippier games than anything. But it can be as simple as a play that Montreal and Edmonton were having a game, and a player had a stick hanging off the bench, which don't have your equipment hanging off the bench. And somebody went by and stick lifted it and shot it across the ice. That was considered not okay, so they gave it a 2 minute unsportsmanlike conduct for that. I didn't agree with it, but I'm not the ref. Roughing. Basically, roughing is any time that one player has punched another player without retaliation. It kind of lines up to someone's trying to start a fight with somebody, doesn't go, they punch him in the face, glove on or off, it doesn't matter, and they go 2 minutes for roughing, and the other guy goes, bye-bye, have fun. Fighting or instigator. So fighting is flat out two guys get into a fight, punching, whatever. Your rule of thumb is once the players have gone down to the ice, that's it, it's done. If you continue going onwards, then you could face further disciplinary action. An instigator penalty is for somebody who for the person who starts the fight. The NHL is kind of trying to say we don't want fighting without taking it out of the game. You can also get, I believe it's a game misconduct for fighting within the last minute of any one given period. They don't want any of that. Delay of game. So a delay of game penalty is another one of those, you can't really do that. It's kind of hard to explain. A delay of game is usually once the goaltender has gone behind the net into this trapezoid that we saw at each end of the ice. In that area, he's allowed to play it. If he goes into the corners and plays the puck, that's a 2 minute delay of game. and then a skater will go serve that time for him. His team will be down one man for 2 minutes. Another delay of game is if a defending player is in the defensive zone and they flip the puck up and it goes flying out of the boards, flying over the boards and into the stands. That's considered a delay of game. That's to stop defenders from just chipping it over the boards and knocking down a penalty 10 seconds at a time. It can really drag on a game if they allow that. So those are the big penalties you're mostly going to run into in a typical NHL game. On the other side here, we have more of dead plays or a couple of other penalties that don't happen very often but can come up. So that being said, the first thing is icing. Icing is when an attacking player dumps the puck from their side of center ice and it goes the length of the defensive zone and the goaltender does not touch it. Then two guys have to try to race to the end. When they get to the offensive zone face-off dot, whoever gets there first wins out. So if the attacking player gets there first, play continues on, keep going. If the defending player gets there, then play goes dead. The reason that's important is because if you get caught icing the puck, you go back to your end of the ice to start the next play, and you're not allowed to do a line change. So you have to get the puck back out of your zone again before you can do a line change on the next play. If that doesn't work, you can see a lot of players that are lines that are exhausted, and all of a sudden they have to skate on for another 15 or 20 seconds, which can feel like forever. Offside. So this was that cherry picking rule. So it is that straightforward. Is the player carrying the puck into the offensive zone does have to be the first player. Now, for a player to be considered offside, both of their skates have to be on the other side of that line. There's a few different ways they've tried to address it. It created a lot of 8-9 minute delays going, did that count? Did it not count? So now it's just as long as your skate lines up properly to the outside of the line, you're still considered onside. The puck has to cross the entire line before any other player can. Keep an eye on that when you see them going in. You'll see how players address that. It's very common for players to kind of get sneaky, spread their legs pretty far so they can drag one before, or keep their skate out of the zone before the puck crosses the line. So the trapezoid, again, if the goaltender plays the puck outside of that trapezoid at the end and tries to dump it down the boards or whatever, they're going to get a delay of game penalty. Again, that's because players in the 90s, most notably Marty Turco and Marty Brodeur, would go down to the ends and they would just fire the puck and you just have this back and forth, and it was the driest thing in the world to watch. But it worked, so that's why they did it. Too many men. So each player or each team is allowed to have a total of 6 players on the ice. That is 5 skaters and a goaltender. If a team's on the penalty kill, that means they're down 1 player. You can basically do the addition, subtraction. Typically what happens is when teams get caught with too many men, it's a line change that gets botched, and it's not 1 player. It's usually like one team's got 9 players on the ice during a line change, and the ref goes, that's way too many, regardless if they're going on or off the bench. Now, one way that you can have 6 skaters is without a goaltender. So you see this commonly, a team that's down by a goal in the last minute and a half of the game, they'll pull the goaltender to the bench to get a 6th skater out on the ice to try and get that advantage on the offense. It doesn't work very often, but it does work once in a while, and it can create for a pretty nice end of the game. But yeah, you have to know how many players you're allowed to have. If you have too many, somebody goes to the bench and you're down either 1 person or another person, depending. Referees. So this is one on ice rule. The big thing with referees is rule number 1. You cannot lay your hands on an NHL official for any reason. That's a quick way to get an ejection from the game, to be facing a suspension, whatever the case may be. Most notable in recent memory, I would say, for my money, was Dennis Weidman when he played for the Calgary Flames. He took a bad hit, didn't like, skated by this ref and just clobbered him out of nowhere on his way by, and he got, I think, a 20 or 21 game suspension. Um, Basically, there was a minor league player that kind of had the same thing. He didn't like what happened with a ref. Ref got in the way of the play. Ref went out to center ice and ejected him, and as he went by, it sucker punched him. League wide lifetime ban for him on that, and I agree. Every rule book in the world says the exact same thing when it comes to an official. You cannot touch them for any reason. Pretty straightforward. So net off the moorings. So this is where you can find a delay of game, but it's not a penalty. It just blows the play dead, and you have to reset. Um, every net has these pegs with a round side to them that go into the pipe, and they kind of create a nestle spot in the ice for the net to sit, so it won't move around off of the goal line. But they're designed in a way so that if a player crashes into them, it will come undone and it will move. That way, a player doesn't collide into an ice or a net that is stationary. So if it comes off the moorings, it's not lined up to the goal line, they blow the play dead because officially getting a goal otherwise doesn't count. Players on the bench. So, big thing with players on the bench. You cannot touch a player that's on the bench. A player on the bench cannot touch play. Otherwise, it's either too many men, delay of game, unsportsmanlike conduct, depending on what happens. Again, I refer back to the instance with a player, the stick hanging off the bench, and it got stick lifted it out of his hands. He was in the wrong. I felt that should have been a double minor because his stick was basically on the ice. Keep your equipment on that side of the bench, of the wall. Now, ejections. Ejections can happen for any of a number of reasons. If you see a line brawl break out where basically both teams, everybody that's on the ice is currently fighting, somebody's likely to get ejected for whoever they feel started it. You can also get them for boarding calls, fighting, really bad boarding calls that do cause an injury. A player is likely to get ejected from the game, and then he'll get 5 in a game for that. So it's a 5-minute power play, and the player's gone from the game. The distinction there is kind of how it tracks on a player's stats more than anything. But bottom line is generally it's a player that has done something like hit a ref, hit a player too hard, started a line brawl. These are the common things. Here is the kicker. A player in Detroit a couple years ago kind of got into it with Matthew Tkachuk, and Matthew Tkachuk kind of gave him a little bit of a poke prod, whatever. I still think he should have gotten an additional penalty for that, but he didn't. Whatever. Matthew Tkachuk is a polarizing player for me because I like what he brings. I just don't like the extra edge because he can cross that line. When you are ejected, once you leave the ice, do not return. So that player wound up getting, I think it was a 4 or 5 game suspension because he was halfway down the tunnel and he came racing back and shot back out onto the ice. Ideally, that was the desired effect Matthew Tkachuk was looking for. Once you're off the ice, do not return to the ice. If as soon as somebody does that, they're in the wrong. They will get a suspension. So, those are kind of the basics of what you'll run into on the ice. Off-ice rules. So here's where you may need to know certain things depending on how you're following up with Twitter, social media, that kind of thing. First one is CBA fines. So the CBA is the collective bargaining agreement. That is the agreement between the NHL Players Association, which is a union, and the NHL ownership, managers, Gary Bettman. Anyways, moving on. So they've come into an agreement that the maximum allowable fine that can be given to a player is $5,000, whether you do something small or stupid, or you try to take a guy's head off with your stick. If you only get a fine, $5,000 maximum. That is important to remember because we'll come back to that during coach and team fines. Player suspensions. So sometimes we hear that a player has been ejected pending further, pending basically an interview. More often than not, if a player is not getting a phone hearing, they are likely to get suspended, especially your repeat offenders that come to mind. Evander Kane, Brad Marchand, Tom Wilson, these are guys that are likely to be suspended if they are ejected from a game. That can be anywhere from a couple games to an entire season to players that have faced lifetime bans. It's just, you did something wrong, we're going to make a point of it. Most recently, Austin Matthews, during the outdoor game with Buffalo, cross-checked Rasmus Dahlin in the neck, head type area. He got a couple games for that. He's not a repeat offender, but they still wanted to go, you can't do that. Coach and team fines. Coaches and teams do not fall under the collective bargaining agreement. So when coaches and teams are fined, there's no $5,000 limit. One of the reasons coaches more likely than not will be fined is because they have said something that they basically criticized refereeing, officiating. That more often than not is what happens. Mark Bergevin has paid out his coaches a lot of money to go, I don't care, you were right, whatever. Teams, if they don't follow, well, when COVID safety protocols, if there's a massive line brawl that seems like it got out of hand, they'll just fine the team overall, that kind of thing. So seeing $100,000, $200,000 fines in those instances are likely what you're going to find, because it's not the same agreement for the players as it is for the management. Rosters. So an off-ice rule that you need to understand if you are following trade deadline, if you're following just the salary cap or a team throughout the season, is that a team can only have 50 players on contract between the NHL team and their AHL affiliate. So I just wanted to point that out because a lot of people go, oh, well, we got this, we got this, we got this. There are a maximum number of roster spots, and that's something that needs to be considered when you're looking at player movement, things like that. The NHL draft lottery. So what happens is any team that doesn't make the playoffs, they are eligible to, basically they do the Powerball type thing, and the first 3 draft positions are done at random. So any team that did not make the playoffs qualifies. The better you do in the standings in that instance, the less likely you are to pull the first, second, or third overall pick. And then after that, it's standings down. So if, say Ottawa gets the first overall, or it finishes dead last, but 3 other teams get picked in the lottery, they'll move down to 4th. Pretty simple. NHL draft. That happens after the NHL playoffs, obviously, to decide the standings and everything. There are 7 rounds. Each team has 1 pick per round unless they trade them out. Then they'll go from worst team to best team. Generally, the last team is in the pick is the team that won the Stanley Cup. Round 2, they'll go from the best team to the worst team. So it kind of does this. That's all it is. So trades and free agency, I just wanted to go over pretty quickly. So whenever you trade players' assets, it is important to remember that you have to be within the salary cap. You have to have the right number of contract spaces. And yeah, there's really not a whole lot I can basically say, but there's a lot of reasons why we don't just see these trades that people will come up with and say, hey, this would be a great idea, this will fix the team, and you're like, yeah, you have a spot for him, you already have 50 contracts, how are you going to bring him in for a draft pick, right? Or you've got $200,000 in cap space and he's a $3 million player. You're not going to make that work. And free agency is any teams or any players that are not currently signed to an NHL or AHL team. That being said, they only have, I believe, until December 1st to sign with an NHL team or they will not be eligible to play through that season in the NHL. So pretty simple, not too much to that. So salary cap rules. This is where it'll get a little bit convoluted. I'll try to keep everything moving quite nicely and try not to overdo it for you. I just went over some basic information, especially because we are coming up to trade deadline, and this will help you kind of understand what needs to be taken into consideration before you try to add Alex Ovechkin to the Colorado Avalanche to go all in. It's never going to happen, mostly because Washington would never trade him. So your salary cap. So every year there's a minimum and maximum that the team needs to be in order to be eligible. So the roof this year on it is $81.5 million. The minimum is that a team has to spend is $60.2 million. They have to be within that threshold by the end of the year. I'm actually not entirely sure what the penalty is for that. The league does work on a hard cap, though. So it's not like the NBA where it's a luxury tax where you spend over and then they charge you X percentage more on that salary cap to pay out. It is, you have to stay within this. This is to stop teams from just buying an NHL or buying the Stanley Cup. Think of teams like Detroit where they would just throw whatever money they could. So your market's like mostly the original 6 teams, but other successful teams where they're like, you know what, we'll pay you $20 million on the year. Who cares? That guy will pay him 15, and then all of a sudden, markets that can't pay that out don't have a chance. So, price per and term per player. So each year in line or each CBA agreement, the price and term per player may change. It may not. It usually lines up to with what is the maximum salary cap kind of thing. Currently, if I remember correctly, the most that one player can get paid per year is $13 million. I believe, something in that area. But I know for a fact the maximum length of a contract that can be put out is 8 years. This is to stop the teams that were looking at 10, 15-year deals for their players, and then it just created this convoluted mess. So yeah, if McDavid, you look at McDavid's contract, it's $12.5 million per year for 8 years. The next time he re-signs, I don't think that would change a whole lot, but it might be a little bit less, but he would probably get signed for another 8 years because that's just the longest you can sign somebody. Salary retention. This is always important when you're looking at trades, especially at the deadline. So the Calgary Flames a few days ago picked up Calle Jarnkrok from the Seattle Kraken. One of the stipulations in the trade is that Seattle held 50% of his contract cost this year. So instead of Calgary paying $2 million for him, the cap hit for him is only actually $1 million. It is a maximum of 50%. You can't retain any more than that. I also don't think that the same contract can be retained more than once. I'll have to look into that. So when you're looking at asset management around this time of year, where you're looking at icing the best team you can, getting everybody ready, you're going to see a lot of movement between the NHL and their AHL affiliate. The first thing I want to go over is waivers. So there's players that I believe it's under 7 years or X number of games played kind of deal. We'll go over it a little bit more. They are not waiver eligible. So these are players that can move freely between the two teams without having to clear what's called waivers. I believe it's after 27 or 7 years. I'll get it all down for another video to explain it a little better. But once a player's completed X amount of time in the league, they have to go through what's called waivers. So in order to send them from the NHL team down to the AHL team for 24 hours, any other team has dibs to go, I'll take him. Why not? You don't see that happen a lot, but it does happen. It can bite teams, and they can lose pretty good players doing that. Now, where one-way and two-way contracts come in, and these are not exclusive to each other. Bear that in mind. The one-way contract regardless of where that player plays, they are paid their NHL salary. On two-way contracts, will determine if they're in the NHL, they'll get paid their NHL salary. If they go to the AHL, they're going to get paid less on their AHL salary. So that's another thing that GMs have to keep in mind when they move players. So yeah, that's just a thing. LTIR. So what LTIR is, it's long-term injured reserve. So if a player is going to be out for 2 months, 3 months, whatever the case may be, what teams are allowed to do is take them off of the roster and out of their salary cap. So say a player's worth $6 million, he goes on to LTIR, $6 million opens up so that you can replace that player for the foreseeable future. There is a way that can really create some controversy. You look at last year's Stanley Cup win from the Tampa Bay Lightning. So they had so many players, or they had 2 key players on LTIR, so they didn't count against the cap getting to the end of the year. What happened was Tampa went in and said, okay, we'll fill that up. Players were reactivated at the playoffs where there is no salary cap rules. Whatever you've got, fire on all cylinders. These 2 players came back on, and now Tampa Bay, going through the playoffs, was $18 million over the salary cap going through the NHL playoffs. They won pretty handily. That happens when you can spend almost 25% more on players than everyone else. It was a big thing. Me personally, don't care. It fell within the rules. If it was a problem, the league would have intervened on it. But that's what happens. LTIR is how you hide players injured so that you can replace them with salary cap. If they come back before the end of the year, like say they come back mid-February, well, now you've got to figure out how to get back under the cap before your next game. Cap circumvention. Basically, you can't do that. Some people look at the LTIR instance from last year and go, that was cap circumvention. It really wasn't, but I can understand why people were a little bit sore about that. It did create a very unfair advantage for them, but oh well, it was legal. Another way that can happen is when players sign a long-term contract, if everything's paid out in bonuses and top-loaded, so all of their bonuses get paid out and they're at the beginning, and then their salary cap goes down to $500,000, whatever, or payout at the end of their contract. That would be considered cap circumvention. There are some instances, that'll be another video. I don't know when I'll do that one because it's just kind of a musings type thing, but we can go over that. It's just ways that teams could try to get around paying less or getting more for the same amount. Think of yeah, I'll come around to it. That being said, we're now on buyouts. So with the trade deadline coming up, you may see players that are looking to be considered bought out either between now and then or at the end of the season. So what happens is the remaining term of the contract is paid out. The player or teams pay 2/3 of their salary cap, their AAV, over twice the length of the remaining contract. So if you looked at Connor McDavid's contract at $12.5 million, they would have to, the Edmonton Oilers, to buy him out, would have to pay out and take a salary cap hit of roughly about $8 million. And if he had 4 years left, guess what? You're paying that for 8 years. Just as an example. That's to prevent teams from creating these contracts that they can't buy out. And, things like that. It's all about keeping contracts under control because they were wildly out of control in the early and mid or late 2000s, early 2010s. Like you're talking $14 million or $100 million 14-year type contracts. League went, no, this is getting out of control. So AAV versus a paid cost. So one example is So what your AAV is that's your technical, your average annual value. That's your actual cap hit. So think of if a player is $3 million, that's their cap hit. What's actually going to get paid out is usually it's priced at their entire base contract plus all of their bonuses. The AAV is calculated at base salary plus 50% of the bonuses. It's just kind of one of those weird things. So if you hear John Tavares, the first year he was in Toronto, he got paid $15 million. Well, yes, he did get paid $15 million, but his actual cap hit was only like 11 or something like that. That's why. So it's kind of important to know the difference between those two. The cap hit is what you want to track through trade deadline, that kind of thing. So I hope that kind of made sense. That's the end of the video there. I didn't really want to over convolute it. Hopefully there was enough information there that you're a little bit better armed, but it wasn't so much that now you're even more confused. If you do have any questions, feel free to drop the questions in the comments. I'll try to clear up anything that I can. I'll do another one based on categories later on, kind of explaining a little bit more of the ins and outs. But yeah, like I said, I want to go over the basics, but there are a lot of them. But yeah, if you like the video, please drop a like. If you want to check out more, please drop a subscribe. I'm going to try and get up daily uploads. I'm not quite at a point where I can do news of the day videos, but little things like this for now. Take a look at standings over time, that kind of thing. That's what I'm aiming for. Hopefully you're a little bit better informed, and hopefully this trade deadline season and going into the playoffs, we can get a few more people that have a little bit better of an idea of what's going on, even though us longtime fans are still going, I don't know, we're guessing. And who knows, maybe we'll take a look at doing a bracket at the end of the season for the playoffs, which I think could be a lot of fun. But until the next video, please stay happy, stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll catch you on the next one. All the best.